A deer stops mid-chew, and every muscle in its body locks up. Not because it heard a predator, not because it caught a whiff of blood. It's just you, hiking boots, half a sandwich in one hand, 40 feet away, and in the next half second, it's crashing through the brush, like the forest itself is collapsing behind it. Somewhere above, an entire flock of birds detonates out of the same tree at once, and a squirrel that was calmly working through an acorn freezes mid-bite, spins, and vanishes up the nearest trunk like its life depends on it. Because as far as its instincts are concerned, it does. You didn't raise a weapon. You didn't even change direction. You're standing there, soft, slow, and about as threatening as a couch cushion, and somehow every animal within earshot just decided you're the single scariest thing in this forest. Scarier than the bear that could kill it in one swipe. Scarier than anything with claws, venom, or teeth built for exactly this job. Why? The answer isn't really about you, specifically. It's about roughly 2 million years of your species doing something to earn that reaction, and once you see what, you'll never look at a spooked squirrel the same way again. Start with the obvious mismatch. Early humans had no claws, no venom, and none of the sprinting speed that separates a predator from a meal. What we had was endurance. Researchers studying persistence hunting, a method some human groups still use today, describe something almost absurdly patient. Pick an animal, start walking after it, and don't stop. Not for an hour. For most of a day, if that's what it takes. The animal sprints ahead, rests, and looks back to find the same upright shape still coming, at the same steady pace, again and again, until its body simply gives out from heat and exhaustion. That's not hunting the way a lion hunts. That's hunting by refusing to quit. And for every generation of prey that treated the distant, slow-walking silhouette of a human as harmless, there was a lesson waiting at the end of that walk. The individuals who reacted early lived. The ones who waited to confirm the threat didn't get to pass that hesitation on. Multiply that filtering process across hundreds of thousands of years, and you're not looking at learned caution anymore. You're looking at an instinct etched into the nervous system before birth. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because the story doesn't stop at humans are scary. In 2016, researchers at the University of Western Ontario ran an experiment that reframed the whole question. Instead of playing growls or the sound of another predator, they hid speakers near watering holes and played something almost comically mundane. Recordings of people talking. Casual conversation. Nothing aggressive, nothing loud. Mountain lions didn't just flee. They fled at more than double the rate they fled from the actual sound of other predators. Deer, bobcats, skunks, badgers, species with no shared ancestry and wildly different lifestyles all showed the same spike in panic at ordinary human voices. Even animals sitting at the top of their own food chain with no living predator to fear bolted harder from us than from anything else in their environment. That's the twist. We're not just one more predator on the list. Researchers now call it the super predator effect. Whatever we are, prey animals have filed us in a category all by ourselves. Here's why. Ecologists who study fear responses describe something called predator recognition. Prey brains run on a kind of built-in field guide, sorting every threat into a category that already has its own rulebook attached. A hawk's shadow sliding across the grass means freeze. A big cat's outline at the tree line means bolt for cover, not open ground. A wolf pack's howl means regroup toward the herd. Those templates took millions of years to build, and they hold up because a hawk hunts like a hawk its whole life, and a wolf hunts like a wolf. So what happens when the same predator shows up as a silhouette on a ridge at noon, then as a shape wading a river at dusk, then as a sound in the sky no wing beat ever made? Humans break the template completely. We've hunted at dawn and at midnight, on foot and from boats, with spears, with snares, with rifles, and now with drones that don't even carry a human scent. There's no fixed rulebook a prey animal's brain can pull up, no pattern that predicts what happens next. We're the one animal that keeps rewriting the test after the exam's already started. But here's the thing, that fear isn't hardwired into every encounter. It's constantly being recalculated. Walk through most cities, and you'll see pigeons standing their ground a foot from your shoe, gulls stealing food off a table, raccoons treating your trash can like a vending machine. Researchers call this habituation, repeated exposure to a threat that never actually delivers on the threat eventually downgrades the response. If fear costs energy and nothing bad ever happens, evolution starts asking why bother. Crows take this even further, and it's honestly a little unsettling. Crows don't just habituate, they recognize individual human faces and hold on to that memory for years. Researchers who deliberately wronged a crow while wearing a specific mask found the birds would scold and dive bomb anyone wearing that same mask long after the original encounter, and would even teach the grudge to crows that were never there for it in the first place. Somewhere out there, a crow is telling its children about you, specifically, and not in a flattering way. Now, here's the disturbing part, or maybe the reassuring one, depending how you look at it. If fear of humans has to be learned, then somewhere, fear should be missing entirely. And it is. When Darwin reached the Galapagos in the 1830s, he wrote about being genuinely baffled by what he found. Birds that wouldn't fly off a branch when he reached for them, iguanas he could nudge into the water with his boot that would swim calmly back and sit down beside him again, like nothing had happened. Marine iguanas, giant tortoises, blue-footed boobies, none of them ran, because none of them had ever had a reason to. The same thing shows up wherever humans arrive somewhere first. Ship logs from early Pacific voyages describe birds walking toward the very people who'd come to hunt them, animals so unbothered by humans that early hunters found it almost too easy. Historians studying the extinction of the dodo point to exactly this. Not stupidity, just a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history with nothing around worth running from, meeting the one animal about to change that permanently. Think about that for a second, because it means the fear you saw in that forest isn't really about you as an individual. It's about a pattern your entire species built, one encounter at a time. And that pattern doesn't just scare animals. It reshapes entire landscapes. When wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in 1995, biologists expected the deer population to shrink. It did, but something bigger happened first. Deer changed how they behaved. They stopped grazing in open valleys because standing in the open was suddenly a risk again. With deer no longer stripping the vegetation bare, trees along the rivers grew back. The riverbanks stopped eroding, and species that needed that streamside cover, birds, beavers, fish, started returning. The wolves barely had to kill anything. The fear alone rearranged the ecosystem. Ecologists have a name for it, a landscape of fear, and it turns out humans generate the exact same effect just by showing up. So how far does that same effect reach once you scale it up past a single national park? A 2018 study published in the journal Science tracked exactly that. Researchers pulled together data on mammals across 6 continents and found the same pattern everywhere they looked. Animals that had always been active by day were quietly shifting their whole schedule toward the night. Not because their habitat had changed, not because of food or weather, purely because humans were around during daylight hours. Picture a tiger that once hunted at dusk, the safest hour by its own ancient clock, now waiting until well past midnight to move at all, because that's the one window when the trails near a village finally stay empty. Deer, wild boar, elephants, tigers, species with almost nothing else in common, were all making the exact same trade. Give up the day, take back the night, the one stretch of time when the most unpredictable predator on the planet is usually asleep. But there's something even deeper underneath that, and it's a little humbling. We also smell like a walking chemical warning label. Between soap, detergent, exhaust, and everything else that clings to human skin, our scent reads as something totally foreign to a natural ecosystem. Wildlife researchers testing camera traps found that leaving strips soaked in ordinary human sweat near a trail suppressed animal activity by roughly the same amount as strips soaked in mountain lion urine. Sit with that for a second. To the nose of a deer or a fox, you personally, unwashed and doing nothing threatening at all, register as roughly equivalent to an apex predator marking its territory. So, if animals are this afraid of us, why do the attacks that make headlines still happen? Almost every case comes down to the same three situations. The animal is cornered with no way out, it's a mother protecting young, or it's been squeezed into close contact with people by shrinking habitat, with nowhere left to retreat. That's not aggression, that's desperation with no better option left. Bears are the clearest example. Given any real chance to leave, they will. But as human development eats into bear habitat, that chance keeps shrinking, and a surprised, cornered bear reacts exactly the way any trapped animal would. There's one genuine exception: polar bears, which actively hunt humans rather than avoid them. It makes sense once you know their history. They evolved with no land predators to fear and no encounters at all with anything walking on two legs. Nothing in their past ever taught them that upright and slow could still mean dangerous. But what if none of this is actually irrational? Here's the part that's harder to sit with. That fear animals carry toward us isn't an overreaction. It's accurate. We've driven hundreds of species to extinction, altered more than half the planet's land surface, and reshaped the global climate. Statistically, the animal that runs from you is making the correct call. But there's a cruel twist buried in that fear too. Because animals flee before we ever see them, we consistently underestimate how much impact we're actually having. Empty-looking forests read as peaceful, not as places where everything already ran. And that same fear stands directly in the way of fixing any of it. Conservationists can't monitor a population that scatters the moment a truck door closes, can't treat an injured animal that would rather risk dying than let a person get close. The wildlife that suffered the most from us is frequently the wildlife least willing to let us help. Can any of that actually be undone? Here's where this ends, and it's not as bleak as it sounds, because that fear isn't fixed. It's learned, which means it can also be unlearned. In Rwanda and Uganda, mountain gorilla groups that once fled at the sight of a park ranger have, over just a few years of careful, consistent, non-threatening contact, gone from fleeing to calmly tolerating researchers working nearby. In areas where hunting has stopped for long enough, animals gradually drift back into daylight, back onto open ground, out of the hyper-vigilant crouch that defines a hunted population. None of that takes generations. It just takes the most unpredictable predator on the planet proving, over and over, that this time it isn't one. So the next time a squirrel loses its mind over your sandwich, remember it's not being dramatic. It's running a survival program refined over hundreds of thousands of years. And as far as that squirrel's instincts are concerned, the program is doing exactly its job. The same intelligence that made us frightening enough to reshape an entire planet's worth of animal behavior is also the only thing capable of dialing it back. Whether enough of us ever will is the only part of this story that hasn't been written yet.